Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of the Rangers Gameplan Podcast, where we discuss the week that was the New York Rangers. And in what initially seemed like it was going to be a pretty quiet week on account that, they lost Game 7, it ended up being quite eventful. There were a lot of quotes that I want to touch on, but for starters, I think we have to talk about the big elephant in the room of the Gallant firing, and we'll just get right into that. I mean, that is...
Yeah. He was definitely a dead man walking. I think most can agree on that after they got eliminated. I know there's a portion of the fan base that liked him, and regardless of me strongly disagreeing with that, he's gone. So, the main thing we talked about last week was kind of the fact that it looked like a collection of superstars, not a team.
Right.
And there's really only one person to blame for that, and that's the coach. The one other thing I will say kind of right off the bat is back in November when the Rangers were very, very bad at the time,
Yes.
the Rangers were actively making calls around the league to see which coaches were available.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that happened. Obviously, Trouba threw his helmet, and they went 30-2 beyond that point, and everything was all well and good for a little while. But Drury, gave him a super team, and we are not playing hockey anymore. So, when you're given this talented of a lineup and you can't get them to gel, there's, you can only blame the players for so much, right? Obviously, we pretty much ripped apart everybody in the lineup. Other than Igor Shesterkin last week. But a lot of it, comes down to the coaching. And the one thing I will say, we're going to get into, obviously, the quotes from the exit interviews and all that in a minute. But it seemed to me like they were not in favor of Gallant for a very long time. And the winning, during the regular season kind of pushed that to the side. But he was on the hot seat pretty early this season, and the team kind of saved him from that. During the exit interviews, and I'm sure Drury had to sit down with each and every single player, it would have taken the team to basically rally around him for this to not happen. And there's obviously rumors that the players, kind of tore him apart in the exit interviews, and while we can't, we have nothing to necessarily back that up, the one thing I can confirm is that they didn't all rally behind him and say that, oh, we love him, don't fire him. Because if they did, he'd be here right now. So regardless if they actually openly voiced their displeasure about him or not, they definitely didn't support him. So that's kind of where we're at on that. And, if that's the case, if the players aren't necessarily, super crazy about him, which I think we have a lot of, quote-unquote evidence of that being the case, then I'm 100% cool with it regardless of how I felt about him, because I have been very against Gerard Gallant from pretty much, day one of him being here.
Yeah.
And, if the players liked him, I would have, just rolled with it and I would have supported it. And in an alternate universe where I liked him, if, the players were saying that they hate him, I would have supported it either way. The main important thing here is the players. So that's pretty much where we're at right now with that.
I think it is a matter with Gerard Gallant, especially for the season as large. The winning masked a massive issue with him, and if you look around the league for all the different teams he's coached for, he'll win for a couple seasons, and the shiny newness of that wears off quickly, and it is an unforgiving drop-off as soon as the honeymoon phase is over. I mean, he took Vegas to the Stanley Cup final in his first season there, and a season and a half later, after the Cup loss, he was gone. And that was a fledgling franchise. And I want to touch on you saying, the players potentially ripping him apart, which I hope... I don't want to say I hope that happened. That makes me sound like a dick. The two quotes that really get me, now with him being fired, which was Trouba's, he's a guy that players respect and enjoy playing for, and Barclay Goodrow's, he's a coach that lets you go out there and do your thing. Neither of them said, I like him, or I like him because he lets me go do my... They're like, oh yes, players around the league surely respect this man. They didn't say This team, they didn't say I as an individual. They were very vague of the verbiage of that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, you can see, even with David Quinn, I can't believe I'm going back to this, there was talk with him and the players during games. He would say things to them. I don't recall a moment other than like a timeout where Gallant would speak to anyone. He would just blankly stare at the game.
Yeah.
The only time I ever recall Gerard Gallant during a game, not during a timeout, saying anything to any of the players was when he made Mika Zibanejad cry on national television after the assist in the Buffalo game. That's the only time I remember him talking to anyone. Was Zibanejad in a slump getting the primary assist on a game winner with under a second left and them eating him alive. That's the last thing I remember.
You know, I definitely forgot about that for a little bit.
Underrated moment in hindsight.
Yeah, definitely. Here's the thing, right? Obviously, if you're in support of him, that's cool. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But if you just look at the numbers, right? The only positive really from, Gallant is his record.
Yeah.
And I can't confidently really give him credit for that. Honestly, maybe a little bit. But at the end of the day, every big game that the Rangers have won in his tenure has been because of Igor Shesterkin.
Yeah.
It's that simple, He's never really made an adjustment that's worked. A lot of the groundwork for this team was kind of already in place prior to him stepping foot in the building. The power play was already proven, and it's not like he created that. He didn't really develop anybody, and the main thing that I will say, this team was glaringly terrible 5-on-5 for 2 years straight.
Yeah. So,
a lot of people, he's definitely not known as an X's and O's guy.
No.
And that's not a good thing. There's never really been a cup-winning coach that's kind of just, throws strategy out the window and just, wills the team to a championship like they do in the movies. That's just not the case. So, being that you're handed this much talent and you get outplayed by literally every opponent 5-on-5 every single night, and that's not an exaggeration. I'm sure they've had a few, where they've outplayed, some teams. But even when you look at, let's just go back to, for example, the 6-0 win against the Penguins. That game should have been like 7-5. Like, the Rangers didn't really play that well in that game. Igor just stood on his head and they capitalized on all their opportunities. But that just goes to show that even at the height of this team, they're not really playing to their full potential. No. Now, obviously, there's blame to put on the players for that. But the fact that no adjustments or improvements have been made in areas that the Rangers have struggled in for 2 years in a row is very concerning. And we'll talk about, the potential candidates in a moment, but something had to change, right? Obviously, right now, there's not, one particular head coach candidate that everybody's raving about. It's kind of slim pickings, right? But I'd rather take a risk on somebody than just run it back with the guy that is not going to work. And like I said, the players, clearly didn't support him, all that much. There's been a lot of rumors that Panarin hasn't really liked him all that much. So, when you're talking about the top players on your team, they got to like the coach. It's that simple. I'm interested to see who they bring in. We'll see. I don't know how, soon that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But like I said, something needed to change. And, pretty much since the start of this podcast, we've been saying this is the best Rangers lineup that's ever been put together in our lives. And he got nothing out of them. So it's that simple. Obviously, a lot of blame has to go on the players. But in a playoff series, when you're, kind of just playing without a structure. Okay, yeah. So I'm not exactly 100% sure what it picked up before it cut out. But I'll just go back by saying, the Rangers obviously didn't really have much of a structure, or at least a structure that worked, right? And And when you're playing against a team like the Devils, who is clearly bought into their system, that's what happens. I mean, the Rangers got shut out twice in that series, and they looked lifeless for most of the games because the Devils just completely ate them alive. Mm-hmm. And like I said, it's obviously easy to sit here in our chairs and say that they have no structure. I'm sure they do something in practice, obviously. But obviously, like I said, they didn't have a structure that worked, or at least in the playoff series, and there was no adjustments made to correct that. So, like I said, like I keep saying, we're obviously very upset at the players for not showing up. But the fact that there was a lack of chemistry with the team and a lack of, adjustments that worked, you can only pin that on the coach. And like I keep saying, the fact that you're given these top players in the league and you can't get them to, perform 5-on-5, it's a detriment to your coaching style for sure.
It's a thing. You said it. He's not an X's and O's coach. He is a coach that goes solely by feel. And his feel was wrong most of the time that he's been here. His line combinations will have one off period. Not even a bad stretch. They'll have a bad period. And then second and third, it's back to the blender. And the most obvious line combination this season, or top two, were Zibanejad with Panarin and Tarasenko, and Trocheck with Kreider and Kane. I was blown away with the connection that Kreider and Kane had this season on that second line. And that line got swapped game 2 of the playoffs, or did they make it to game 3 against the Devils?
I don't think they made it to game 3. I could be wrong about that, but I mean, they might have made it to 7 p.m. or whenever the puck drop was, but they definitely didn't finish the game.
No.
So
they had the best chemistry. And the fact that he would continually do that, that's not a one-off thing. Like, that's the first one that comes to my mind, because that was a genuinely great line the entire after the deadline. The Kane, Trocheck, and Kreider line was fantastic, and it got changed. His gut feeling is wrong, and when you don't have an immaculate defensive structure to go off of, as soon as your gut feeling becomes wrong, you're absolutely cooked. And there were some technical things that Lindy Ruff, who again is not a elite head coach at this point, coached him under the table, and when it came down to gut feeling, he beat Gallant under the ice. And now, as they look for a new coach, I will just say it, and I'm pretty much echoing what you've said. I would rather pick some rando off the street than a retread. I beg you, if their birth certificate is anything over 50 years old, no, please God, no. I can't take I will say, because it's funny, the Tortorella rumor.
Oh yeah, it's not gonna happen, but it's just funny to think about.
Can you imagine?
The one thing I will mention real quick is, obviously you talk about him getting out coached by Lindy Ruff. So far, all right, I mean his tenure's over now, but in every playoff series, Gallant has had with this team, he's gotten out coached.
Oh yeah,
it's that simple. It really is that simple. You go back to round 1 against the Penguins, the Rangers could do nothing until Crosby got hurt, and that was the turning point in the series. Okay, they got completely dominated 5-on-5, even in the games they won in that series, and they squeaked out a win. Rod Brindamore, every time he had home ice, he would completely outcoach Gallant, and obviously the Canes were not as good of a road team, but even in those games, I mean, the Rangers got outplayed 5-on-5 in the games they won in that series, and then you go to Tampa, and John Cooper makes all the right adjustments, and the Rangers didn't have an answer. So, like I said, every series, we made it to the conference finals last year. We were 2 wins away from the Stanley Cup final. But, I mean, they barely squeaked out, that playoff run. They didn't really look all that great in any of those games. They got blown out in plenty of those games last year, especially against the Penguins. So, I mean, if you can't be confident about, Gallant even out coaching Lindy Ruff, then there's really just no point. And like you just said, I would definitely rather take a shot on maybe an assistant somewhere, or I mean, even Chris Knobloch, who's doing a great job with the Wolfpack. I wouldn't be opposed to that. He's been an assistant at the NHL level, and he's definitely getting a lot out of the guys in our system right now. So I would rather go with the guy that you already have rather than, like you said, just going with one of the 50-year-olds that have been fired a million times at this point. Obviously, all the coaches available, in terms of the big names, they've all accomplished a lot. I understand that. But they were fired for a reason, right? If you look at Daryl Sutter, the players hated him in Calgary. They legitimately couldn't stand him. Quenneville would be... the drama that would come with that would be absurd. Even like Bruce Boudreau, he hasn't really won anything. So, any of them, they're kind of just coaches that have been, plugged in for 2 to 3 years and fired and rinse and repeat for pretty much a decade now with all the guys that are available. So if you can find an assistant somewhere that has done a great job, or Knobloch or something like that, I would 100% go with that rather than just taking a shot on one of these guys that you can pretty much be confident that's, not going to work out.
Yeah. I do want to touch on the Gallant quotes briefly, because I want your opinion on it. Do you think that he knew going into the exit interview that he was going to be fired, and so all this coach was just him being difficult and not wanting to give the media anything to go with, or do you think he genuinely thought he was staying? Because there was the normal day, I'm fine, when asked about the breakup day, and then multiple times saying, I can't believe I have to ask questions about me being fired. This is ridiculous. Do you think he knew, or was it genuinely like they kept it away from him?
Yeah, I don't think that they straight up told him that it was going to happen, but I definitely think he had it in the back of his mind, for sure. That whole interview kind of seemed like him defending himself and marketing himself. He kept bringing up his record and all those things. It seemed like a last breath for him, not to stay on the team, but I think like I just said, I think it was more him defending himself than anything else. And the main thing that I pulled, well, a couple things. I mean, the official New York Rangers YouTube channel posted every single exit interview except Gerard Gallant's. So
do with that what you
yeah, I mean, at least the social media team knew. So I would find it difficult to believe that, the social media admin knew and Gerard Gallant himself didn't know. So, yeah, I mean, I'd be shocked if that was the case. The one thing that I will say, obviously, this is just a rumor and we don't know. But one of, probably the biggest rumor that came out over the past, week is that Chris Drury and Gerard Gallant supposedly had a screaming match after Game 4. Yeah. So, with that being said, the vibe that I got from Gallant's exit interview was kind of him spiting the team a little bit. I don't know if that's the, right word to use. But he didn't really... It seemed like he wasn't associating himself with the loss. It seemed like he already had one foot out the door, and he was kind of just mentioning his record and all those things, and it seemed like he didn't really care about them getting eliminated too much. And, with the laundry list of bad quotes he's had, with the team, he's never shown that level of carelessness before. Yeah. So I think he definitely knew. And like I mentioned before, back in November, the Rangers were looking for a new coach. So it's not like this is, out of the blue and it was only because of, the playoff loss. They definitely didn't like him all that much. So for quite some time in the winning, pushed that under the rug. But I definitely think he knew to some extent that I don't think the team officially let him know at that moment, but he definitely didn't feel like he was coming back in that interview whatsoever.
he definitely didn't feel like he was talking to keep coaching in New York. It felt like he was talking to keep coaching in general.
Yeah.
And the "I'm fine" quote really got me. Like, he just seemed so carefree about all of it. And, like,
Yeah, every other coach in the league would have, said at least they're disappointed and hurt or
yeah,
something along the lines of that,
I, I think that's a good segue into more quotes, because the majority of this has to be about the quotes. This team felt way too fine. They felt way too fat and happy about the result of this season. The overwhelming amount of
Yeah.
quotes, like, you have the sad Kreider quotes, which is just it's a yearly
Yearly
occurrence.
tradition.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
it's like
I mean,
Thanksgiving
after
almost.
every loss, he's like that. He's kind of just Mr. Ranger at this point. He's all about the team. He's always gonna, regardless of their record or anything, he's always gonna be talking about what they could do better and stuff, and that's awesome. But the one thing that I can say is whenever Kreider is being interviewed, I really have no point in actually watching it because you know what he's gonna say.
You can
He's never gonna give you any, juicy clickbait or anything. It's just not gonna happen.
one of these podcasts should just be an hour of me with a dozen Kreider quotes and be like, is this from 2013 or 2021?
Yeah,
And be
yeah.
like, oh god, let the goalie down, got hung out to dry, bailed us out. Shit, this could be any time. Really, there were the annual
Yeah.
sad Kreider quotes, but they felt way too okay. And I'm not saying they all have to be bawling their eyes out in the interviews, but man, they are way too content with having that team built and not winning a round.
Yeah, it seemed like it just seemed like they accepted it way too fast, and obviously, they're probably more upset than we are. That they're the athletes here. We're just sitting watching on the couch. I'm not trying to make it seem like they don't care about, getting eliminated, but it seemed like there was a lot of inner turmoil almost, and you can go back to that rumor about the coach and the GM screaming at each other.
Yeah.
It seemed like just a lot went wrong here, and it didn't really feel like they at any point in the series felt super confident in themselves just
Yeah.
based on how they accepted it, because it seemed like the coach already had his foot out the door and they went to game 7 and stuff like that, but a lot of it was them just saying that the Devils are a good team and all that stuff, which is true, but they didn't really reflect on what could have been, I guess. I mean, you definitely had a couple quotes of them saying, we thought we had the team to do it and all that stuff, but you didn't get that feel that you had last year when they got eliminated. I guess is
No.
the best way to sum it up.
Which is
The one
wild
thing,
because last year the Rangers themselves were a significantly worse team, and Tampa had every right to beat them into the dirt. Whereas this season, I still am sitting there just staring blankly at a TV screen, watching the Devils and Canes play, and be like, "How is this not us?"
yeah, yeah. And I mean, the one other thing I will say about the quotes is, it kind of seemed to me like Trouba was biting his tongue a little bit when he got asked about Gallant. He hesitated and he kind of had to think on the fly. But like you said before, nobody really said that they, liked him or supported him. And I'm sure a lot of the same, happened behind closed doors. So that all goes into why he's not the head coach anymore. The I guess what I'm trying to say is it's pretty obvious that none of them really expected him to be back, I guess, because if they all liked him and if the rumor wasn't true that there was a screaming match, I think they would have supported him a little more. I mean, when you go to Winnipeg and you look at Rick Bowness and his kind of blow up in front of the media, the team came out the next day and defended him.
Yeah.
That did not happen with this
No.
team from the players or the organization or anything like that. So this definitely was waiting to happen. Being that it was a first round exit, I don't know how you could have possibly made the case about Gallant coming back. And, it's still a pretty fresh wound. I mean, it hasn't been, too long since the season, got ended and stuff like that. And I don't know. It's just I'm still just pretty shocked that we're not playing, considering everything. When you talk about them verbally saying they're saving their energy for the playoffs and the lineup and all that stuff, and it's still just pretty shocking to me. So we're gonna have a lot to talk about this offseason. I think the coaching change was an expected move, but now it's kind of, where do you go from here? Because it needed to happen, but now we're just completely clueless as to who they're going to hire. And not only that, but this is probably as clueless I've ever been to a Rangers offseason, because I truly have no clue what's going to happen with pretty much any part of the team. Every other offseason, you can lay out their needs and everything like that, and you can look at targets, but now it's kind of just, how are you going to figure out how to bring these guys back? And how are you going to, fit them around whoever the new coach is? And that's going to be a whole new, scenario. The one other thing I will say about the quotes from Pack Up Day is Kakko seemed like he was taking shots at Gallant for sure. Not obviously, it's not like he said anything super obvious, but all he was talking about was getting more ice time and getting power play minutes and stuff like that. And he never truly got that opportunity with Gallant.
Yeah.
And there's been a couple times where, he said that, if he has one bad game or one bad shift, he automatically gets demoted and he doesn't really have much of a leash. He's said that a couple times. So, in terms of his confidence, it was definitely, pretty destroyed by Gallant, whether we like it or not, or whether you agree with that or not. It definitely hindered him a lot. I mean, when you go back to, the very beginning of the season, Kreider, Zibanejad, and Kakko were on a line together, and they were the best line on the team, and they never, ever got the opportunity to play with each other ever again.
No.
So, Kakko didn't really do anything to deserve that type of demotion. Out of all the kid line, I think he's probably shown the most promise. And this has got to be his last shot, in terms of his tenure with the team. I think bringing a new coach and then just make a decision on laughing Kakko afterwards. I think that's where I'm at. However, if they bring in a guy like Daryl Sutter, I have no hope. I have no hope in them becoming anything with this team.
I am going to genuinely lose my shit if they bring in Daryl Sutter as the coach. Like, that would...
Yeah.
The thing is with Kakko, he has probably shown the most of the three. He's good everywhere you put him. He's at least a Swiss Army knife where you can put him on the penalty kill, and he's a solid penalty killer. But they've just not given him any of the confidence that he needs. He genuinely will have that one bad game, and it's down to the fourth line. You had Quinn consistently in 2021, like the short season, not the actual COVID season, but the one after, where he was on the fourth line for long stretches. Pretty undeserved. He looked great with the Zibanejad and Kreider. He always has whenever he's been on that line for the 7 games he's played there in his career. We've said it before, and I want to say it again. Just make the lines going into next season. Decide on what they are. I don't care what happens through the first 30 games. Those are the lines. You've made your decision. Let something build, and if it doesn't, go from there. But the past 2 coaches that the Rangers have had have just, at the first sign of any trouble, gotten the blender out and torched it. And it has not worked. It has not worked. And again, I've said with guys like Kakko and Lafreniere, where yes, this team has not done a wonderful job to develop them, but they were extremely highly touted prospects. They need to figure it out on their own. But at the same time, this team genuinely has done a terrible job developing them. And I'm going to be a little bit easier on Kakko than Lafreniere, because Kakko was a very good prospect. Lafreniere was preached to us like he was the gospel and the second coming of Sidney Crosby, and he just I don't know if you've looked at the numbers there, Evan, but he's not been Sidney Crosby.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he's close to it either, in my opinion. So,
hot take.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, you kind of just hit the nail on the head. Like Kako definitely shows the most promise. Um, they've done a terrible, terrible job developing them. However, I mean, they've definitely gotten some opportunities. To start the year, I mean, Laugh and Kako were in the top 6, so they didn't really do much with that opportunity, and that's all you can really go off of. I mean, when you look at it, the Rangers got off to a very rough start, and they had to change something. So I mean, if Laugh and Kako took that opportunity and ran with it, those lines would have probably remained the same, and they would have gotten off to a much, much better start. It's that simple. Obviously, the first couple of years of both of them, there was no development happening.
No.
And that's not their fault, but at this point, you can only look at the opportunities they're given, and they just haven't really taken advantage of them. Like I said before, this is really it, man. This is their last year to really start soaring and become what we thought they were going to be. Hopefully, they bring in a coach that's going to make that happen. But who knows? I mean, we can sit here and break all that down, but you still got to re-sign them, or at least Laugh. And who knows if he's necessarily going to want to stay here. I'd assume he would, but who knows? Maybe he would just want to go somewhere that, would be a guarantee for ice time for him.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily knock him for doing that. I think that would open up a lot for Kako because, let's face it, Kane and Tarasenko probably will not be here.
Oh, they're so gone.
There's pretty much no shot. So that opens up an opportunity. And like I said, hopefully there's a new coach that lets them, just gives them at least 20, 30 games of runway and doesn't change it. And we'll see what happens. I would rather know that it's, the hope for them is gone rather than maybe, if the kid line is still the third line and you don't really know what they look like with top line minutes and then they get let go and they become superstars in Vancouver and Arizona or something like that, I'd rather know that the experiment is over rather than question it.
The eternal pain of Lafreniere just ending up in Columbus and turning into a 100-point player in his first season. And
oh my God.
A Hattie in his return to New York. That's in the script.
It is scripted. It is scripted. I mean, I don't even want to think about that because that's so happening.
He's gonna look great in Columbus with Bedard, man.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I will say, kind of just to wrap up, I mean, I guess I'll ask you once I'm done, but I guess my top candidate right now, and this might be a reach, but I don't necessarily know if it is, I would just bring Chris Knoblauch up and just hire him. He's made a deep playoff run with the Wolfpack, and I think he's honestly the safer bet than any of the guys that are available out of the big names. I mean, I don't want Mike Babcock on this team, that's for sure, and everybody else that's available is in that same tier of coach. So I would rather just bring him in, and the reason I'm mentioning this is because obviously we have a lot of contract talks to talk about. I don't think Nico Mikkola will be back. I would be shocked. Just because I think they're going to prioritize everyone else over him, and I just don't think they're going to have the money to bring him back. It's not a knock on him. It's just that Lindgren and Miller are going to be top 2 priorities, I would think, and then obviously Laugh after him or after them, and then Kako, and you talk about all those guys. The one thing I will say, the start of the rebuild, we got 1 million D prospects. Okay. We still have 1 million of them, and they've made a deep run in the Calder Cup playoffs, and I would just try one of them. If they made a deep run down there, at least one of them has to be doing something right. So if, they're all still cheap, they're not going to cost you any more than like $900K. I would just try that before bringing Mikkola back, because we have all these D prospects that are sitting down there, and we're not going to trade for anybody, so you got to just try one of them. Now, with that said, I would rather have the coach that developed them, in helping them adjust to the NHL level, rather than, Daryl Sutter or Mike Babcock that probably will choose just about anyone else over them. So I guess what I'm trying to say is gotta just start going with some of your homegrown guys, because I have the feeling that we're just going to struggle up until the deadline and, trade a bunch of assets again for guys that are, might not work out. And I would rather go with just a safe coaching bet and one of your guys that are, currently playing very well in the minors, rather than just taking a risk for no reason on a coach and another 6-pair defenseman than anything else. Now, like I said, I just wanted to ask you kind of, is there one specific coach that you had in mind, or are you kind of just, you need some more time to run through them? Because I know it's slim pickings, but...
No, there is a coach that jumps out to me, and it's Knobloch. That move makes too much sense for the Rangers not to make it. You are cash broke going into the season. We went over it last week a little bit, where we went over just the dozen players that you have to re-sign. You're going to have no money. You are already banging your head against the cap ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
There are no good prospects for head coaches. It's a bunch of, at best, mid-tier coaches at this point in their careers.
Mm-hmm.
So even if Knobloch doesn't work out that well, he's still going to be as good as the other candidates. And if you're cash broke, I am totally cool with having him. Again, the biggest problem for this team, not in the 7 games against the Devils, but for the past 2, 3, hell, go back to when Henrik was still in his prime, has been defense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The Wolfpack are now in a deep playoff run. We have heard nothing about the minor league prospects except how good the defenseman prospects are. That has been the biggest praise. Is, oh my god, Zach Jones is going to be incredible. Brendan Schneider is going to be incredible. This guy, Miller is going to be incredible. And he has been pretty solid, aside from the back half of this season.
Yeah.
It makes too much sense not to go with Knobloch, because you're going to have no money. You're going to have to depend on 1 or 2 of those guys from the Wolfpack to come up and play legitimate minutes on this team. And that's assuming you're going to need 1 at minimum, and that's assuming no one gets injured, which, the way this defense core has worked out the past couple of years, you end up needing another one. And you're going to be asking those 2 guys to play, 17 minutes a night as rookies. I've heard nothing but praise about Zach Jones. I would love to see him get legitimate time. I think Knobloch is the guy that would give players a legitimate chance, especially the young guys, and let the D-core materialize, and also give them structure for the first time in forever. And if you look at the core, he worked with Lingrid, right? Lingrid was in Wolfpack for a couple seasons, if I'm not mistaken, or a season. Am I?
I think it might have been a season, but I don't think it was a full season. But regardless, he definitely did work with him at some point.
He worked with him a bit. He worked a good bit with Miller, who was there for a few seasons. He worked with Schneider for a while. He worked with Jones for a while. He's still working with Jones. It makes too much sense for him not to be the pick. And again, I know it was a very, very short little stint, but he did fine as the coach in 2021 for that 9-game stretch that he was here in Quinn's absence. The first game, and again, it goes to show you that it's a lot more than coaching, and coaching doesn't make that huge of a difference. Don't yell at me for saying that. They beat the Flyers 9-0 in the first game he was there.
Yeah.
You can have a plethora of different coaches there, and still, if you have a good base, it's going to work out.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I will say about him, obviously, I'm not trying to make it seem like I've watched every single Wolfpack game that they played, but, when you talk about the younger coaches, it seems like they're not afraid to, think outside the box and try different things and make, impactful adjustments.
Yeah.
The game has obviously changed significantly since guys like Mike Babcock or Daryl Sutter first started coaching. So they still cling on to their old faithful ways that they're not going to stray away from. A lot of these younger coaches have had a lot of success. That's why, I've said it a couple times on here, but the younger GMs and coaches just seem to, blow everyone else out of the water because things are just changing now. So I would just go with him over anyone else. And it's not like he hasn't had NHL experience. He's been an assistant, in the NHL at the NHL level, and he knows the Metro very well. He was with the Flyers. So I just can't. There's not a candidate available that you can talk me into over him. So, it's not like this is the NFL or anything like that where coaching makes a ginormous difference. So, like you said, as long as you have a good base, obviously we have some very good players here. He's been in the system for a while, and you're probably going to have to bring up some of his guys that he's currently coaching to help bring them along. And I just can't think of a coach available right now that would even consider, playing a guy like Zach Jones. There's just nobody that would, no coach available that would even consider doing that. They would rather bring in some guy that's terrible defensively, but they're just a big body that's been in the league for a while. That's what's going to happen if you bring in any of the other coaches. They're not going to want Zach Jones. They're going to ask you for some guy that, is playing on one hip, and he's been out of his prime for 6 years, but he's just a big body that's been in the league for, a dozen years. That's where these older coaches tend to lean on their preferences. So I would very much like to avoid that.
I can hear the Mike Babcock presser of, guys, we're very excited to welcome back to the New York Rangers, or welcome back to the league, and for the New York Rangers now, Patrick Marleau, good player.
Oh my god. Yeah. Yeah. Oh no. Oh no. Oh my god. This is what I'm talking about. Just please avoid that. And I mean, Chris Drury has worked, pretty hand in hand with Knobloch for a few years. I mean, Drury was the GM of the Wolfpack before here, so he knows him very well. I can't imagine that any of the other guys are going to sway him in any other direction. So we'll see what happens, but just please stray away from the guys that are available, please.
Well, that's what I wanted to bring up with Chris Drury as a show of going away from the old guy that's been there for 1,000 years at the NHL level, and it worked. You get rid of everything after the Tom Wilson game. You clean house, and you fire a long, tenured veteran GM for a toddler of a GM who comes up and starts fleecing the league. He made a couple of fantastic trades last year to get you for Toronto and Kopp. And this season, I understand that he was helped along with the Kane trade because Patrick Kane basically said, I am leaving and I am going to New York. You can get a bag of potato chips for me. But the Tarasenko trade was also very good. The Mott trade, I don't even remember what they gave up for Mott to get him back.
It was like Julien Gauthier and maybe a pick, but it wasn't anything crazy.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
It worked. You brought up the questionable GM that was young from the Wolfpack, and boom, it works. That makes too much sense to not go with Knobloch. It's really, and they're probably not, because this team will not make the obvious decision and the obvious move. But I don't know how you could possibly talk Drury out of going with him.
Yeah, and I guess I just gotta say, I hope that our wonderful, wonderful owner that everybody loves just stays out of it. That's the thing I will say, because I think if it were up to him, Daryl Sutter would probably already be here, or somebody like that. So Babcock. I just hope he keeps his nose out of it. James Dolan does not really know. He definitely doesn't know much about hockey. He's strayed away from the team pretty much for at least the past decade. So just let Drury just pick his guy and just don't meddle with it. Like you said, I just can't imagine that, anyone else would make any more sense than Knobloch at this moment in time. Like I said before, I don't know how soon this is going to happen. I hope that the Wolfpack win the Calder Cup and it happens the day after. That would be awesome. But like I keep saying, it's just going to be interesting, reworking the contracts and bringing some guys back. And I really hope that they just don't screw this up. I have confidence that Drury will make the right decision. I think the one thing that you can say about him with his time with the team so far is he is indecisive is not a word you could use for him, is what I should say. He's made some big decisions so far, and for the most part, they've worked out. So we'll see what happens, with the coaching search. I just hope that we don't have to come on here and talk ourselves into, any of the any of the older guys that hopefully are not here.
Here's why Mike Babcock is going to lead us to a Stanley Cup, folks. Sit down. Let me tell you a story.
Yeah, I don't want that to happen. The other thing that I will say is, I obviously Quenneville, he's second all time in wins, and he's everybody that's ever played for him loves him, but the drama that comes with with him.
Except for one prospect.
Yeah. So that that kind of goes without saying. So he's a good coach, but just please avoid the headache. Everyone else though, the players hate them. Yeah. It's that simple. Every other guy available, their players just completely quit on them. So I don't know how you can hire anyone else. I just don't. I don't know. Well, even if you bring in an assistant somewhere, I would much rather that. Even if I've never heard their name in my life, I would much prefer that than anybody available.
The thing is with Mike Babcock, and you mentioned players giving up on some of the coaches, you can look at the Leafs. And I'm not necessarily saying that the Leafs are a great team to look at in terms of success. Mm-hmm. Not postseason success, I guess you could say. Yeah. Regular season, they've been fantastic for the past couple of years. They were playing for Babcock. They got him fired. They call up Sheldon Keefe. I want to say Keefe is like 120-60 with the Leafs since being called up or being hired to be their GM from the Marlies. I would go with that direction. You have proof with the Leafs. You have proof with your own team in terms of the GM position. Just go to your young system, and farm teams should be used for more than just the players. If you have good coaches down there, if you have good GMs, there's a reason you have those positions at lower teams. It's to see what you could possibly turn them into. And right now I think the Rangers have an opportunity just staring them in the face. Mm-hmm. And I thought it before we got on here. It makes too much sense to not go with him.
Yeah. And, as much as, we've sat here and, awed over Knobloch, I think the only guy, he's not even available right now. But if he becomes available, I would jump all over, would be Mike Sullivan.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen, but there's, word out there that he doesn't really want to sit through a rebuild. He's a very, very win now coach. He's all about, the playoffs and everything like that. The Penguins just honestly had a terrible roster this year. So if he, if he sits down, obviously they don't have a GM right now, but whenever they get one, if he sits down with them and says, hey, I don't want to sit here through a rebuild, and he becomes available, I would be so upset if he goes anywhere else, because that is the only coach that I think would be a genuine difference maker for this team. Yeah. Not to say Knobloch wouldn't be, but he's just a question mark. If you bring Mike Sullivan in, I have no doubt in my mind that they will, at the very least, make a deep playoff run. Yeah. So I would jump all over him. Obviously, that's fantasy land, and it hasn't happened yet. Who knows if it's going to happen? But that pretty much just sums it up. If it's not going to be Sullivan and he's not available, then just bring in your own guy that's in the minors and having success right now. It's that simple. And I guess it makes it much easier to kind of sit here and talk about the kid line now that Gallant isn't here, because you could at least talk about them having a fresh opportunity with a new coach. If he were the coach next year, I would pretty much close the door on Laughing Kako, just because I do not see a world where they would have become anything under him. Yeah. So at least we have that out of the way now. Yeah, I mean, I guess this week was definitely pretty eventful, and we just got to see what happens with the coaching, and we got to see what happens with the contract situations. I've pretty much said my piece on everything. I guess we just got to wait for the NHL and the Calder Cup playoffs to finish, and then hopefully we'll know who the coach is by then, and then we got to stress ourselves out about how the hell we're going to bring some of these players back. So
it's going to be great.
Yeah, I guess to touch on that very briefly, The one thing I do want to say is I would prioritize Ryan Lindgren over anyone else. Out of our own free agents.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much debating that. But you cannot let him go anywhere.
Oh,
It's
please no.
that simple. So, when the time comes, we will sit here and pull our hair out trying to figure out how they're going to bring everyone back. But I guess right now we just have to stress out about just keeping our fingers crossed they don't hire one of the any of the guys available right now. So
I will briefly say, with the cap situation, with the players that are free agents or restricted free agents, and with the head coaching hire, this is a franchise and legacy altering offseason for Chris Drury.
Mhm.
Because if he makes a wrong move, it could cook the team. Which is a really fun thing to think about, that you're hoping that a GM who's been in the league for 2 years has a completely flawless offseason. So that's a fun thing to think about. And I just wanted to put that out there so it's in everyone else's mind and not just mine.
Yeah, I have faith in him. I mean, he
So do I.
hasn't given me a reason not to yet, so hopefully it stays that way, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So
Yeah. Speaking of wait and see, we'll know who gets Bedard by the next time we record. We'll know in about 30
Oh yeah,
minutes.
that's in like a couple minutes from now.
Yeah,
I've completely forgot about that.
That's going to be fun.
Hopefully nowhere in the Eastern Conference.
Come on, Anaheim.
Please.
I'm pulling for you.
Please, Ducks, or just anybody in the West, please. Just take him.
I'm pulling for Anaheim or Chicago. Can you imagine?
Oh my god. Anaheim would be fun because they have a lot of young prospects. Chicago, that would just be beyond lucky for their franchise to go into a rebuild and get this guy right away after you just won 3 cups and you've fallen off a cliff from that point and you just get handed a fresh start. So that
chills when he somehow goes to the 0.5% chance and ends up a Nashville Predator.
oh my god, that would be crazier things have happened. So we'll see.
What? Or if he ends up in St. Louis and ends up fighting Jordan Binnington by Game 3.
Oh yeah, that would be just like. I mean, I wouldn't complain because, like I said, I just want him in the West, just anywhere in the West. That's all I have to say. Because if he goes to the Flyers, I'm gonna be like, oh my god, just please no.
The Flyers or Columbus would be pat. I would love him to go to Anaheim for the lone reason of I want to see the McTavish, Zegras, and Bedard line because
my god,
that would haunt nightmares for the next decade.
Yeah. So at least they're a Western Conference team, and I could root for that to happen. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make. Please, just go anywhere in the West, please.
Anywhere but here. I don't think that's. I don't think that's too hard of a request.
Yeah. So I guess that pretty much wraps it up. It was a pretty eventful week. It sucks that we're not talking about the Rangers playing hockey, but at least we can sit here and talk about things leading up to when they eventually start playing hockey again.
Yeah.
So I pretty much said everything I have to.
Yeah, I think we're good. So likely next week we'll be back and talk about the fun contract negotiations and which players to bring back or not. Tentatively. Seems like the plan. Yeah.
And hopefully we don't have a coach by then. Hopefully, because we want to wait for Knobloch. Please don't hire a coach by then.
Oh, please. Or
All right.
they've just told Knobloch as soon as his run's over with, he's coming up.
That would be awesome.
That'd be great.
So
but
we'll see.
Until then, thank you all so very much for listening to the 9th episode of the Rangers Gameplan Podcast. Until next time, I'm Weston, and go Rangers.
Go Rangers, guys.